Greetings. I am delving into the topic of information overload on cognitive functioning. But first, let's kind of define what information overload is. So, a simple internet search characterizes it as an abundance of data that surpasses an individual's or system's capacity to manage or utilize it efficiently. This can lead to reduced productivity, difficulty making decisions, or even feeling anxiety or stress. However, the articles I delved into gave a more concise, conceptual interpretation of the definition of that information overload is defined as the available amount that makes information confusing and dysfunctional, given the time restriction involved in decision-making processes. With that being said, let's get into our first article. So, Article 1 is information overload, choice deferral, and moderating role of need for cognition, empirical evidence by Pilley et al. In this article, they analyzed their theory that information overload offsets choice deferral, or the individual tendency/preference to postpone a decision. And some perceived factors that they listed were time pressures, perceived similarity between options, perceived uncertainty, and option comparison. So, being under pressure can make you opt out from choosing any one thing at all, or if things are too similar to each other, it can make it hard to choose. And perceived uncertainty kind of ties into that, as well as option comparison if they are too similar. And what they aimed to highlight in their experiment was that they wanted to see how controls the information load effects of number of options and the number of attributes. And they explored the independent role of each of these variables, as well as its interaction pattern with each other, because it's interconnected. And the moderator effects can be personality, which can affect cognition. For example, if someone's high on agreeableness, that can make it harder for them to make a concise preference in a given amount of time. Their method and experimental design consisted of about 120 versions of 17 choice sets that were generated, and each one were a different set of choice tasks to ensure there wasn't any consumer preference bias. And there was a number of variation subgroups. So there was three main subgroups, and in these three, one was people presented with 4 options, 8 options, or 12 options. And what they were testing to see here is if more or less options made it easier or harder to choose a decision, or to not choose any one thing at all from being cognitively overwhelmed from too much information. So, they had the respondents pick their preferred option, and they could also choose a no option, and they altered which way things were presented, like price versus like size, and just different things to ensure there wasn't a way that the consumer could have been influenced subconsciously to choose one thing over the other. And the dependent variable was that each choice set did have a preference or non-preference for the non-choice alternative. So the results, I know this looks like a lot, but it's actually pretty simple to understand once I break it down. When the number of options were held at 12, the increasing number of attributes increases the choice deferral. So basically, the more options, the more likely the consumer is going to opt out from choosing one thing. And the results were consistent with their P4 theory that posits the preference uncertainty account, which was increasing the number of options over a limited variety of attributes, tends to also increase the similarity of perceived options, leading to the difficulty in determining the preferred option. And with that, choice deferral can increase with the number of options increasing and some amount greater than the amount of attributes, as can be noticed when the number of attributes is fixed at 4 versus when it's on the higher end from 8 to 12, which is super interesting. And how we can interpret this is that the interaction between the number of options and the number of attributes depicts an interdependency that was not clearly established in previous studies that influenced this particular study, which goes back to what I was saying, that it was all interconnected. And the more options presented makes the task of choosing one option over all the others more difficult. So basically, too much information makes it more challenging to make one decision and focus on just one thing. So information overload can impair cognitive functioning. With that, our second article is on a similar note. It studies the influence of information and social overload on academic performance and the role of social media fatigue, cognitive depletion, and self-control by Wang et al. So, their theory posits that the dependency on social media and the access to unlimited information poses repercussions on students' mental health and academic performance. And some perceived factors are social overload, the pressure to stay connected, so stress, anxiety, fatigue, cognitive and emotional depletion, and ultimately stunted concentration. And keep note of what I just said because those all play into each other in the results section. So, what they aim to highlight was how information and social overload can affect social media fatigue and its impact on academic performance, and how fatigue reduces the ability for cognitive resources, which in turn affects individuals' ability to perform tasks that require high cognitive demand. They also analyzed how excessive use of the internet can lead to cognitive depletion, affecting processes such as attention and memory. I know that all sounds like the same thing in different words, but it is slightly altered, but it is also connected. So their methods, they had about 320 university students from China fill out a survey um, uh, about their degree to which they agreed with each of the prompted instruments. And by instruments, I mean information overload, social media fatigue, cognitive depletion, academic performance, and self-control. And they had different prompts asking different questions about these various instruments. And the results are very fascinating. Also, AVE stands for the average variance extracted. So this was kind of their visual result. And as you can see, stress and social overload, as well as self-control, have an effect on the strain of social media fatigue and cognitive depletion, which results in a stunted academic performance as the outcome, with the control variables being experience, time, age, and gender. And the results posited that information overload, the AVE, was 0.629, social overload 0.726, social media fatigue 0.880, cognitive depletion 0.56, academic performance 0.93 or 0.793, and self-control was 0.573. According to Hare et al., the cognitive validity considered was considered accurate and adequate when it surpasses 0.70 and exceeds 0.50. Therefore, the AVE for all of these met the suggested criteria. So, how we can interpret this was that these all offset the other. So, information overload has a significant positive effect on social media fatigue. In turn, social media fatigue has a positive effect on cognitive depletion, and in turn, cognitive depletion shows a significant negative effect on academic performance. And conclusions. Although no one thing can be proven, there are palpable implications from the experiments that I just presented. Regarding information, an influx of information may overstimulate one's cognitive retrieval and consolidation of important information. And regarding cognition, cognitive abilities may be negatively implemented or depleted by unlimited access to information. Now, what am I saying here is that information overload can alter and ultimately stunt and deplete one's cognitive functioning and ability to focus on information at hand. This is my works cited, and thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you have a great night.